7 guys, 7 different brains, but when it comes to picking up foreign languages while being the biggest boy band on Earth, who actually learned the fastest? Think about it. These men weren't sitting in classrooms. They were doing world tours, UN speeches, interviews in languages they barely knew, and somehow leveling up in real time. So who cracked the code first? Who shocked even their own members with sudden fluency nobody expected? And who sits at number 1? The one pick that will genuinely make you rethink everything. No fan bias, no guesses, just real moments, real evidence, and real surprises. 7 ranks, 1 list. Let's go. Number 7, Jin. Now, before anyone comes at me with pitchforks, yes, we're starting with Kim Sek-jin at number 7, and no, this is not a diss. Let's get that out of the way right now. Being at number 7 on this list doesn't mean Jin is bad at languages. It means that compared to the other 6 members, his speed of picking up foreign languages was the slowest, and honestly, that's what makes his story so incredibly endearing, and dare I say, the most relatable on this entire list. Because let's be brutally honest here. Most of us would be Jin in this situation. Most of us wouldn't magically become fluent while juggling a career that literally spans the entire globe. In Jin, he knew that about himself. He was painfully, hilariously, beautifully self-aware about it, and instead of hiding from it, he leaned into it so hard that he turned his language struggles into some of the most iconic BTS moments ever captured on camera. Let's rewind to the early days. When BTS first started doing Japanese promotions around 2014, all 7 members had to learn Japanese for their releases. They recorded Japanese versions of their songs, did Japanese interviews, and attended Japanese variety shows. Now here's where it gets interesting. While some members started picking up conversational Japanese relatively quickly, Jin was the one who consistently relied on scripted lines and memorized phrases. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when you compare the speed at which he absorbed and applied new vocabulary versus, say, the members we'll talk about later, there was a noticeable gap. In interviews, you could see Jin carefully reading from notes, sometimes mixing up pronunciation in ways that made the Japanese hosts laugh, but always with that signature Jin confidence that turned every stumble into a memorable TV moment. Now let's talk about English, because this is where it gets really interesting. BTS's journey to the American market started gaining serious traction around 2017, and by 2018, they were doing major English language interviews on shows like Ellen, Jimmy Fallon, and the BBMAs. During these early appearances, the dynamic was crystal clear. RM handled about 90% of the English communication, and the other members would chime in with short phrases or rehearsed answers. Jin, in particular, had a very specific pattern. He would deliver one perfectly timed English phrase, usually something funny or unexpected, and the whole room would explode. Remember his iconic worldwide handsome introductions? That wasn't fluency. That was pure strategic genius. Jin understood something that language learners often miss. You don't need to speak a language perfectly to make an impact. You just need to know the right words at the right time. But here's the honest truth that even the most devoted Jin biases would acknowledge. When it came to actually absorbing English at speed, Jin was consistently behind the curve compared to his members. In Bon Voyage seasons, you could see him struggling more with basic transactions in English-speaking countries, ordering food, asking for directions, making small talk with locals. These moments revealed that Jin's functional English vocabulary grew at a slower pace. There's a famous moment in Bon Voyage Season 3 in Malta where Jin attempted to communicate with locals and ended up creating this beautiful chaos of Korean-English hybrid sentences that became legendary memes. And you know what? Army loved every second of it, because Jin never pretended to be something he wasn't. He never faked fluency. He showed up as himself, a guy who found languages genuinely challenging, but refused to let that stop him from connecting with people. And that's actually a really powerful thing. By the time we hit 2019 and 2020, Jin's English had improved, no question about it. He was forming more complete sentences, his pronunciation had noticeably gotten better, and he was more willing to try speaking English spontaneously in live broadcasts. But the gap between him and the faster learners in the group remained consistent. His Japanese similarly plateaued at a functional but limited level. He could get by, he could charm an audience, he could deliver scripted content beautifully, but off-script, free-flowing foreign language conversation was never his strong suit. And here's the part that actually makes Jin's position on this list so important. He represents the majority of language learners in the real world. Not everyone picks up languages fast. Not everyone has that natural ear for new sounds and grammar patterns. Some people have to work 3 times as hard for half the progress, and Jin embodies that reality with zero shame and maximum charisma. He proved that you don't need to be the fastest learner to be the most memorable communicator. So yes, number 7. But number 7 with the biggest heart, the loudest laugh, and the absolute refusal to let a language barrier dim his shine even for a single second.
Number 6. Suga. Alright, let's talk about Min Yoongi, the man who has mastered the art of making you think he doesn't understand a single word of what's being said in a foreign language, only to drop a perfectly timed response that proves he's been following the entire conversation from the very beginning. Suga, at number 6, is one of the most fascinating cases on this list because his language learning journey doesn't follow any conventional pattern. He's not the guy who studies textbooks. He's not the guy who practices out loud with enthusiasm. He's the guy who sits in the corner, seemingly zoning out, absorbing everything like a human sponge, and then casually reveals weeks or months later that he picked up way more than anyone realized. And honestly, that's the most Yoongi thing ever. Let's go back to the Japanese question first, because that's where the earliest evidence shows up. When BTS began their Japanese activities, Yoongi approached it the same way he approaches everything else in life, quietly, efficiently, and with minimal drama. While some members were loudly practicing pronunciation and making big shows of their progress, Yoongi was doing something different. He was listening, constantly listening. In behind-the-scenes footage from their Japanese recordings, you can see Yoongi paying extremely close attention to the vocal coaches in pronunciation guides, rarely speaking up, but clearly internalizing everything. And here's the thing, his Japanese pronunciation when he did speak was consistently among the cleaner ones in the group. Not flashy, not conversational, but precise. He didn't say much, but what he said was accurate. That's a very specific type of learner, the kind who prioritizes accuracy over volume, quality over quantity. In Japanese interviews, Suga typically kept his answers short and controlled, 1 or 2 sentences maximum, but those sentences were grammatically tighter than you'd expect from someone who appeared to put minimal visible effort into studying. This tells us something crucial about how Yoongi's brain works with languages. He processes internally, stores what he needs, and deploys it with surgical precision when the moment calls for it. Now let's get into English, because this is where Yoongi's story gets really compelling. In the early days of BTS's American promotions, Suga was firmly in the let Namjoon handle it camp, and honestly, he seemed perfectly comfortable there. He would sit in interviews with his trademarked unbothered expression, occasionally nodding, sometimes smirking at jokes he clearly understood but chose not to respond to. And that's the key detail right there. He understood. If you go back and watch American interviews from 2017 and 2018 with fresh eyes, pay close attention to Yoongi's facial reactions. When the interviewer makes a joke in English, watch his face. He reacts in real time, not after RM translates, not after a delay, in real time. His eyebrows move, his lips twitch, sometimes he lets out a quiet laugh, all before the Korean translation happens. This means Yoongi's comprehension was significantly ahead of what he was willing to show publicly. And this is what makes ranking him so tricky, because language learning speed isn't just about speaking, it's about comprehension. And Yoongi's comprehension developed faster than most people ever gave him credit for. The problem, or rather the very Yoongi characteristic trait, is that he rarely converted that comprehension into active language speech. He understood English at a moderate to good level much earlier than people think, but he chose silence over imperfect speech. That's a personality-driven language learning barrier, not a cognitive one. He could have spoken more. He chose not to, because Min Yoongi doesn't do anything publicly until he's confident he can do it at the standard he sets for himself. And that standard, it's impossibly high. Fast forward to his solo activities and August D promotions, and you start to see the real extent of Yoongi's English development. In his solo interviews, particularly around the D-Day album era, Yoongi was noticeably more willing to attempt English, not fluent, not flowing, but significantly more than the near silence of earlier years. He was constructing his own sentences, responding to questions with original thoughts rather than memorized phrases, and even making small jokes in English. The progress was undeniable. It just happened on Yoongi's timeline, not anyone else's. There's also a fascinating detail about Yoongi and language that often gets overlooked. His work as a producer exposed him to English constantly, writing lyrics that reference English phrases, collaborating with international artists, studying English language music for production inspiration. All of this created a passive immersion environment that slowly but steadily built his foundation. He wasn't formally studying, but he was soaking in English through his craft every single day. So why number 6 and not higher? Because despite his impressive comprehension skills, Yoongi's active language output, the actual speed at which he could comfortably produce foreign language speech in real-time situations, remained behind several of his members we'll get to next. His listening comprehension outpaced his speaking ability by a wide margin, and that gap matters in a ranking about overall learning speed. He understood fast, but spoke slow, and that combination lands him right here at 6. But make no mistake, Yoongi's linguistic intelligence is seriously underrated, and if this ranking were purely about passive comprehension and reading ability, he'd be sitting much, much higher. The silent genius heard everything. He just chose his moments.
Number 5. J-Hope. Okay, let's talk about Jungkook, the man who radiates so much energy in every room he enters that you almost forget to notice something quietly remarkable happening behind all that sunshine. This guy has been steadily, consistently, and almost sneakily leveling up his foreign language skills in a way that gets nearly enough credit. J-Hope at number 5 is honestly one of the most underrated language learning stories in all of BTS, and once you see the full picture, you're going to understand exactly why he sits right here in the middle of this list. Not because he's average, but because his journey represents something incredibly unique: the power of pure effort, emotional intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to connect with people, regardless of what language they speak. Let's start with Japanese, because Hoseok's Japanese story is genuinely impressive when you look at the timeline. When BTS started their Japanese promotions, J-Hope was not one of the members people expected to excel. He was the main dancer, the energy guy, the mood maker. Nobody was looking at him thinking, oh yeah, he's gonna pick up Japanese fast. But here's what happened. Hoseok threw himself into Japanese with the same relentless work ethic he applies to his choreography. In early Japanese interviews from around 2014 to 2016, you can see Hoseok doing something really smart. He wasn't just memorizing scripted answers like some members. He was actively trying to construct sentences in real time. Were they perfect? Absolutely not. Were they grammatically clean? Not always. But the speed at which he went from 0 to I can actually have a basic conversation was noticeably faster than several of his members. There's footage from Japanese variety shows where Hoseok would attempt to answer questions on his own before looking to a translator, and the hosts would visibly light up because his pronunciation, while not perfect, had a natural rhythm to it. And this is actually a really important linguistic observation. Hoseok's background as a dancer and performer gave him an unusually good ear for rhythm and cadence, and that translates directly to language learning. Languages have rhythm, they have musicality, and Hoseok's trained ear picked up on the melodic patterns of Japanese faster than you might expect. His intonation, the rise and fall of his sentences, the way he naturally mimicked the flow of native speakers, all of that came from the same skill set that made him one of the greatest dancers in K-pop history. Now, English, this is where J-Hope's story gets really emotional and really real. In the early days of BTS's American push, Hoseok was visibly one of the more nervous members when it came to English. You could see it in his body language during interviews, the way he'd lean toward RM for translation, the way he'd laugh a little too hard when he didn't fully understand a question, the way he'd default to his signature, I'm your hope, you're my hope, I'm J-Hope, introduction as a safe harbor in a sea of unfamiliar language.
And there's no shame in that. It was his anchor, his comfort zone, and honestly, it worked every single time because Hoseok delivers those words with so much genuine warmth that language barriers dissolved on the spot. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. If you track Hoseok's English chronologically through Bangtan Bombs, V-Lives, and behind-the-scenes content from roughly 2018 onward, the improvement curve is steep, noticeably steeper than Jin and Suga during the same period. Hoseok started doing something that linguists actually recommend is one of the most effective language learning techniques. He began using English in low-pressure environments first. Not in big interviews, not on live TV, but in casual moments with the members, in playful V-Live broadcasts, in Instagram comments, in silly behind-the-scenes clips where nobody was judging. He gave himself permission to be bad at English in spaces that didn't matter, and that freedom accelerated his learning in a way that formal study never could have. By the time Jack in the Box dropped in 2022, and especially leading into his solo promotional activities, J-Hope's English had reached a level that genuinely surprised people who hadn't been paying close attention. He was doing English interviews with a confidence that was worlds apart from 2017 J-Hope. Not fluent, not RM level, but functionally comfortable. He could understand questions without translation in many cases. He could formulate responses that went beyond memorized phrases. And most importantly, he could be funny in English. And if you know anything about language acquisition, humor is one of the hardest things to pull off in a foreign language because it requires understanding of cultural context, timing, double meanings, and subtle wordplay. The fact that Hoseok could make American interviewers genuinely laugh with intentional English humor tells you his comprehension had reached a seriously respectable level. There's also a detail about Hoseok that makes his language learning story uniquely beautiful. He never, ever let a language barrier stop him from making someone feel loved. Watch any interaction between J-Hope and international fans. Watch him at airports, at fan signs, at concerts in foreign countries. Even when his vocabulary was limited, Hoseok communicated more warmth, more sincerity, and more emotional depth with broken English and pure body language than most people could with perfect fluency. He understood something profound about language that many people miss. The words are just the vehicle, the emotion is the message, and Hoseok's emotional fluency was always at a native level, in every language, in every country, in every moment. So why number 5? Because while his efforts and emotional intelligence were off the charts, his speed of formal language acquisition, vocabulary building, grammar comprehension, reading ability sat right in the middle of the pack, faster than Jin and Suga's active output, but not quite matching the members still above him who displayed quicker absorption and more rapid real-time application. Hoseok built his language skills like he builds his dance routines, with relentless repetition, emotional commitment, and a refusal to stop until he got it right. Not the fastest method, but one of the most beautiful.
Number 4. BTS V. Alright, we need to have a serious conversation about Kim Taehyung right now, because this man's foreign language learning story is one of the most genuinely unexpected and fascinating things in the entire BTS universe, and it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves. V at number 4 is the member who broke every prediction, defied every assumption, and showed the world that language learning isn't always about discipline and textbooks. Sometimes it's about curiosity, cultural obsession, and a brain that works in ways that conventional education can't even begin to explain. And if you've been sleeping on Taehyung's linguistic abilities, you are about to wake up hard. Let's start with the elephant in the room, Taehyung's Japanese, because this isn't just, oh, he learned some Japanese phrases for promotions. No, this is a full-blown, jaw-dropping, how did he get this good situation that caught even the other BTS members off guard. When BTS first started doing Japanese activities, all 7 members were in the same boat, starting from zero or near zero, working with vocal coaches and language tutors to record Japanese versions of their songs and handle basic promotional appearances. But somewhere along the way, something clicked in Taehyung's brain that didn't click in the same way for everyone else. By the time we hit 2016 and 2017, Taehyung's Japanese wasn't just functional, it was conversational, and not in a stiff, rehearsed, textbook kind of way.
in a natural, flowing, I actually understand the culture behind the words kind of way. There's footage from Japanese fan meetings and interviews where Taehyung is having genuine back-and-forth conversations with Japanese fans and hosts, not just answering questions, but asking his own questions, making jokes, using colloquial expressions that you don't learn from a standard curriculum. He was using casual Japanese speech patterns, dropping formal endings when appropriate, adjusting his politeness levels based on context. These are things that take years for most foreign language learners, and Taehyung was doing them with a naturalness that honestly baffled people who study Japanese linguistics. So how did this happen? How did the member who's known more for his artistic, free-spirited, slightly eccentric personality end up becoming one of the strongest Japanese speakers in the group? The answer lies in something that linguists call intrinsic motivation through cultural immersion, and Taehyung is basically the poster child for it. You see, Taehyung didn't just learn Japanese because he had to for work. He fell in love with Japanese culture. Anime, Japanese films, Japanese music, Japanese fashion, Japanese art. Taehyung consumed Japanese media voraciously, not as a study tool, but as genuine personal entertainment. He's openly talked about watching anime without subtitles, about listening to Japanese artists he admires, about his appreciation for Japanese aesthetics and storytelling. And this is the secret weapon that most language courses completely fail to replicate. When you're genuinely, deeply, emotionally invested in a culture, your brain absorbs the language at a fundamentally different speed. It stops being study and starts being living. Every anime episode Taehyung watched was an unconscious listening comprehension session. Every Japanese song he sang along to was pronunciation practice. Every conversation with Japanese friends and collaborators was real-world application. He wasn't studying Japanese, he was living it, and his brain responded by acquiring the language at a speed that formal education alone could never have achieved. Now let's talk about English, because this is where Taehyung's story takes an interesting turn. Unlike his Japanese, which developed through deep cultural passion, Taehyung's English journey was more gradual, more uneven, and honestly more human. In early American interviews, Taehyung was mostly quiet on the English front, occasionally throwing out words or short phrases, but largely staying in the background linguistically. But here's what makes Taehyung's English learning unique. He had these bursts of sudden, unexpected English that would catch everyone off guard. He'd go months seeming relatively quiet in English, and then suddenly, in a V-Live or a Bangtan bomb, he'd drop a perfectly constructed English sentence out of nowhere, leaving fans scrambling to clip it and share it across every social media platform. This burst pattern is actually a recognized phenomenon in language acquisition. It's called the silent period breakthrough, where learners who appear to be stagnating are actually building massive internal databases of vocabulary and grammar rules, and then suddenly deploy them all at once when they feel ready. Taehyung's brain wasn't slow at learning English, it was accumulating, waiting, and then releasing in concentrated bursts of surprising competence. By the Weverse era and his more recent solo activities, Taehyung's English showed marked improvement. His Weverse posts to international fans became more complex, his English in interviews became more spontaneous, and perhaps most tellingly, his willingness to try English without fear of mistakes increased dramatically. He started treating English the way he treated Japanese years earlier, not as a chore, but as a bridge to people he genuinely wanted to connect with. And when Taehyung decides he wants to connect with someone, no language barrier on earth is going to stop him. There's also a deeply touching dimension to Taehyung's language learning that often goes unspoken. His motivation was never about impressing anyone or looking smart. It was always about connection. He wanted to understand the Japanese fans who wrote him letters. He wanted to read the English comments from armies around the world. He wanted to walk into a room in any country and make someone feel seen and heard without needing a translator to carry his heart across the gap. That's not just language learning. That's emotional bridge building at its finest. So why number 4? Because Taehyung's Japanese acquisition speed was genuinely remarkable, arguably top tier within the group, but his English development, while impressive in its burst patterns, was slower and more consistent than the 3 members above him. When you average both languages together and look at overall speed of functional foreign language acquisition, Taehyung lands right here. Above the middle, clearly talented, clearly driven by genuine passion, but just a step behind the trio that took language learning to another level entirely.
Number 3. Jimin. We have now entered dangerous territory, the top 3. And sitting right here at number 3 is a man who approaches language learning the exact same way he approaches everything else in his life, with obsessive, almost frightening levels of perfectionism, relentless practice behind closed doors, and results so clean that native speakers have literally paused mid-conversation and asked, "Wait, are you sure you're not fluent?" Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about Park Jimin. And if you thought Jimin's only superpower was making millions of people fall in love with a single glance and a whispered high note, strap in, because his linguistic journey is about to add an entirely new layer to your appreciation of this man. Let's start with the thing that puts Jimin in a category almost entirely his own on this list, his pronunciation. Because here's something that most casual fans don't fully understand about language learning. Vocabulary and grammar are things anyone can memorize with enough time and effort. But pronunciation, true pronunciation, the kind where a native speaker can't immediately tell you're foreign, that requires something that can't be taught from a textbook. It requires an ear, a deeply sensitive, finely tuned, almost musical ear that can detect micro differences in vowel length, consonant placement, pitch accent, and tonal inflection. And Park Jimin, he has one of the most remarkable ears in the entire group. Let's talk Japanese first. When BTS started recording Japanese tracks and doing Japanese promotions, all 7 members worked with pronunciation coaches. They all improved, they all got functional, but multiple Japanese fans, language experts, and even Japanese media commentators have pointed out something specific about Jimin. His Japanese pronunciation is consistently rated among the best in the group, and some have argued it's the single best. And this isn't just fan hype. Go back and listen to BTS's Japanese recordings carefully. Listen to how Jimin handles vowel sounds, how he navigates the pitch accent system that makes Japanese so notoriously difficult for Korean speakers, how his consonants land with a softness and precision that mirrors natural Japanese speech patterns. It's genuinely remarkable. There's a reason Japanese fans have a particular affinity for Jimin, and while his visuals and stage presence obviously play a role, his language effort is a massive factor that often goes unrecognized. In Japanese interviews and fan meetings, Jimin displayed a progression that was noticeably faster than the bottom half of this list. He moved from scripted answers to semi-spontaneous responses quicker than expected, and when he spoke Japanese, there was a warmth to it, a deliberate care in every syllable that showed this wasn't just rote memorization. He was genuinely trying to sound right, not just understandable. And that perfectionist streak, the same one that makes him practice choreography until 4 a.m., the same one that makes him re-record vocal takes dozens of times until every breath is exactly where he wants it. That same relentless standard was applied to his Japanese pronunciation with devastating effectiveness. Now here's where Jimin's story gets really interesting. English. Because Jimin's English journey is one of the most dramatic improvement arcs in BTS, and it happened in a way that perfectly reflects who he is as a person. In the early American interviews, Jimin was noticeably shy about English. Not just quiet, genuinely shy. You could see it in the way he'd physically lean away from the microphone when an English question came his way, the way he'd immediately look at RM with wide eyes, the way he'd cover his mouth when attempting an English word, as if physically trying to hide his vulnerability. And for anyone who understands Jimin's psychology, this makes perfect sense. This is a man who doesn't like doing things publicly until he can do them well. He'd rather say nothing than say something imperfectly in front of millions of people. But behind the scenes, Jimin was grinding. There are multiple accounts from members and staff about Jimin studying English late at night, watching English content on his own, practicing phrases in the mirror, asking RM to correct his grammar. He was putting in the work, he just wasn't ready to show it yet.
And then, almost like a dam breaking, Jimin's English started surfacing publicly around 2019 and 2020 in ways that made armies collectively lose their minds. Suddenly, Jimin was writing longer English captions on social media. Suddenly, he was attempting full English sentences in V-Lives without looking terrified. Suddenly, he was responding to English-speaking interviewers with answers that went beyond the rehearsed script. And the pronunciation, oh my God, the pronunciation. When Jimin speaks English, there's a smoothness to it, a careful attention to vowel sounds and word stress that tells you he didn't just learn what to say, he studied how to say it. His English doesn't sound like Korean accented English in the way you might expect. It sounds like someone who spent hours, literal hours, listening to how native speakers shape their mouths around words and then practiced replicating it with the same discipline he applies to his dance isolations. By the Face era and his solo promotional activities, Jimin's English reached a level that would have been absolutely unthinkable to 2017 Jimin. He sat through English interviews with a calm confidence that radiated growth. He understood questions in real time. He formulated original responses. He even navigated tricky follow-up questions that required on-the-spot thinking rather than memorized answers. Was he perfectly fluent? No. Did he still occasionally search for words or restructure sentences mid-thought? Yes, but the speed at which he went from too shy to say hello in English to conducting solo English interviews with genuine personality and humor was one of the fastest transformations in the group. And that speed, combined with his elite-tier pronunciation across both Japanese and English, is exactly why he sits at number 3. There's also something deeply emotional about Jimin's relationship with language learning that needs to be said. Jimin has talked openly about how much it means to him to communicate directly with international fans. He's described the frustration of having so much love in his heart and not having the words to express it without a translator. And you can feel that frustration turned motivation in every English sentence he's ever spoken. There's a weight to it, an intention, a desperate desire to reach people that goes beyond grammar and vocabulary. When Jimin speaks English, he's not just communicating information, he's reaching across an ocean of language with both hands, trying to grab hold of the people he loves on the other side. And that emotional fuel, combined with his perfectionist work ethic and his extraordinary ear for pronunciation, propelled him to a language learning speed that earns him this spot, firmly, undeniably, in the top 3.
Number 2. RM. Yeah, you read that right. Number 2. Kim Namjoon, the man who literally addressed the United Nations General Assembly in fluent English, who has conducted hundreds of interviews in English without breaking a sweat, who learned an entire language primarily by watching Friends on repeat as a teenager, is not number 1 on this list. And before you slam your phone down and start typing furious comments, hear me out. Because this placement isn't a diss. This isn't disrespect. This is actually, when you look at the full picture with completely honest, analytical eyes, the most accurate assessment of what language learning speed really means. And by the time I explain why RM is at number 2, you're going to understand exactly why number 1 had to go to someone else, and it's going to blow your mind. But first, let's give this man every single ounce of credit he deserves, because Kim Namjoon's English story is legitimately one of the most inspiring self-education stories in modern pop culture history. Full stop. Rewind to Ilsan, South Korea. Early 2000s. A teenage Kim Namjoon is sitting in his room, and he's doing something that millions of Korean teenagers were doing at the time: watching American TV shows. But Namjoon wasn't just watching for entertainment. Something inside him clicked. He started watching Friends, the iconic American sitcom, with Korean subtitles first, then with English subtitles, and eventually with no subtitles at all, over and over and over. He didn't just watch the show, he studied it. He mimicked the pronunciation. He wrote down phrases he didn't understand and looked them up. He practiced speaking along with the characters until their rhythm became his rhythm. And this wasn't a school assignment. This wasn't his parents forcing him. This was pure, self-driven, intrinsic motivation from a kid who decided, on his own, that he was going to learn English and he was going to do it his way.
And here's what makes Namjoon's story so remarkable from a linguistic standpoint. He essentially achieved upper intermediate to advanced English proficiency through self-study in an era before language learning apps, before YouTube was a major resource, before AI tutors and online conversation partners. He did it with a DVD box set and sheer willpower. By the time BTS debuted in 2013, Namjoon's English was already at a level that set him apart from virtually every other K-pop idol in the industry. And this wasn't just, I can say hello and thank you English. This was, I can think in English. I can crack jokes in English. I can express complex philosophical ideas in English. His vocabulary was vast, his grammar was surprisingly solid for a self-taught speaker, and his confidence, the willingness to just go for it in English without hesitation, was something that would take most of the other members years to develop. When BTS started their American promotions, Namjoon wasn't just the translator, he was the bridge. He was the reason BTS could even exist in the American market during those crucial early years. Without Namjoon's English, there are no iconic interview moments. There are no viral late-night show appearances. There's no Wasted on Me with Steve Aoki leading to deeper Western collaborations. There's no Grammy nominations conversation. Namjoon's English didn't just benefit him, it literally carried the entire group's international communication on his shoulders for years. And he did it while also being the leader, the main rapper, the primary lyricist, and the emotional anchor of a 7-member group navigating impossible levels of fame. The weight of that is almost incomprehensible. Now let's talk about the UN speech, because this is the moment that cemented Namjoon's status as arguably the most proficient English-speaking K-pop idol of all time. September 2018, the United Nations General Assembly. Kim Namjoon stands at the podium and delivers a speech in English about self-love, youth empowerment, and the importance of speaking yourself. And he doesn't just read from a script. You can see him making eye contact with the audience, adjusting his delivery in real time, emphasizing words with natural English intonation patterns. The speech went viral. It was covered by every major news outlet on the planet. And it wasn't notable because a K-pop star spoke at the UN. It was notable because he did it in a second language with the composure and eloquence of a native speaker delivering the most important speech of their career. That moment alone would be enough to justify a #1 ranking for most people. So why is he #2? Here's the honest, analytical truth, and this is where we have to separate overall proficiency from learning speed. Namjoon's English journey started in his early teens. By the time BTS debuted in 2013, he had already been studying and immersing himself in English for roughly 5 to 7 years. By the time he delivered the UN speech in 2018, that's over a decade of English exposure and practice. And his results are extraordinary, no question. But this ranking is specifically about speed. How fast did each member acquire foreign language skills relative to their starting point and the time invested? And here's where a crucial detail comes into play. Namjoon's English, while the best in the group by a wide margin, was built over a long timeline. His improvement curve, while consistently upward, was gradual and steady rather than explosively rapid. And when we look at his other foreign language, Japanese, Namjoon's progress was actually surprisingly moderate. Despite years of Japanese promotions, Namjoon's Japanese never reached the conversational fluency that some other members achieved. In Japanese interviews, he often defaulted to English or Korean rather than attempting extended Japanese responses. His Japanese pronunciation, while functional, didn't display the natural ear that members like Jimin and V demonstrated. This reveals something important about Namjoon's linguistic profile. He's not necessarily a fast language learner in the universal sense. He's a deep language learner in one language. He went incredibly deep into English, achieving a level of mastery that nobody else in the group can touch, but that depth came at the cost of breadth. He poured so much cognitive energy into English perfection that his Japanese acquisition speed remained relatively average. And when you're ranking overall foreign language learning speed across multiple languages, not just English, but the full spectrum of linguistic challenges BTS faced, Namjoon's singular English excellence combined with his moderate Japanese puts him in an incredibly strong but not quite untouchable position. He's the best English speaker, he's the most proficient overall in any single foreign language, but he's not the fastest learner. And that distinction, as razor thin as it is exactly what separates #2 from #1. Let me say this clearly. Without Kim Namjoon, BTS does not become a global phenomenon. His English was the key that unlocked every international door the group ever walked through. He carried a responsibility that no other member had to carry, and he did it with grace, intelligence, and a quiet brilliance that changed the entire landscape of K-pop's relationship to the English-speaking world. Number 2 on this list isn't a consolation prize. It's a throne. It's just that there's one more throne, slightly higher, slightly more shocking, that belongs to someone else.
Number 1. Jungkook. And there it is, the name that just made half of you scream, "I knew it," and the other half scream, "Wait, what?" Jungkook, the golden maknae, the man who has spent his entire career proving that there is literally nothing he can't learn at an absurd, almost unfair, borderline supernatural speed, and foreign languages are no exception. In fact, foreign languages might be the single most impressive example of the Jungkook phenomenon, because unlike singing or dancing or filming or painting, language acquisition is something that most scientists agree is heavily influenced by age, environment, and innate cognitive wiring. You can't just practice harder and become fluent. It requires a specific type of brain plasticity, a specific type of auditory processing, and a specific type of fearlessness that most people simply don't possess. Jungkook possesses all of it, and the speed at which he proved it left even his own members speechless. Let's establish something important first, the timeline. Jungkook joined Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee at the age of 13. He debuted with BTS at 15. When the group started doing Japanese promotions, he was barely 16. When they started seriously engaging with the English-speaking market, he was in his late teens and early 20s. This matters because we're not talking about an adult with a fully developed brain and years of life experience approaching language learning with mature cognitive strategies. We're talking about a teenager who is simultaneously learning to be a professional singer, dancer, performer, and public figure, and who somehow found room in that overflowing plate to absorb foreign languages at a rate that left linguistic breadcrumbs of genius scattered across every piece of BTS content ever created. Let's start with Japanese, because the evidence here is staggering. Jungkook's Japanese development was fast, not just faster than average fast, notably fast. In Japanese interviews from the 2015-2017 era, Jungkook was already displaying conversational Japanese skills that went beyond scripted responses. He was forming original sentences, responding to unexpected questions with real-time Japanese construction. And here's the detail that kills me. He was doing it with a casualness that suggested it wasn't hard for him. While some members visibly concentrated and carefully pieced together Japanese sentences word by word, Jungkook would toss out Japanese phrases like he'd been speaking them his whole life. His pronunciation was natural, his grammar, while not perfect, was surprisingly intuitive, and his willingness to just speak, to throw himself into Japanese conversations without fear of mistakes, accelerated his learning curve in a way that more cautious members couldn't replicate. There are specific moments from Japanese variety show appearances where Jungkook answered questions in Japanese so quickly and so naturally that the hosts visibly did a double take. They weren't expecting that level of fluency from someone his age with his limited formal training. And multiple Japanese fans have commented over the years that Jungkook's Japanese has a particularly natural feel to it. It doesn't sound like textbook Japanese. It sounds like someone who absorbed the language through real interaction and cultural immersion, which is exactly what the Golden Maknae did. Now let's get into English, because this is where Jungkook's #1 ranking goes from reasonable argument to absolutely undeniable. The transformation of Jungkook's English is, without exaggeration, one of the most dramatic linguistic improvement arcs in K-pop history. In early American
interviews, 2017, 2018, Jungkook's English was minimal, a few words here and there, mostly shy smiles and nods. He was clearly the youngest, clearly the least confident in English among the more outspoken members, and clearly content to let RM handle the heavy lifting. If you watched those early interviews, you would never, and I mean never, have predicted what was about to happen, because starting around 2019 and accelerating through 2020, 2021, and into 2022, Jungkook's English didn't just improve, it exploded. And the speed of that explosion is what separates him from every other member on this list. Consider the evidence. His solo V-Lives became increasingly peppered with English, not just borrowed words or simple phrases, but full sentences expressing complex thoughts and emotions. His social media presence shifted to include more English content, often with grammar and vocabulary that suggested genuine comprehension rather than Google Translate assistance. His interactions with English-speaking collaborators and interviewers showed a comfort level that was evolving in real time, almost visibly from one appearance to the next. And then came the solo era, when Seven dropped and Jungkook began his solo promotions in the English-speaking market. The world saw something that made jaws hit the floor across every time zone. Jungkook was doing English interviews, solo English interviews, without RM, without a translator hovering nearby, just Jungkook, a microphone and an English-speaking interviewer, and he was handling it, not just surviving, handling. He was understanding questions in real time. He was forming responses that were grammatically coherent and emotionally expressive. He was making jokes. He was being playful, charming, and authentically himself in a language that he could barely string a sentence together just 4 or 5 years earlier. The speed of that transformation is genuinely jaw-dropping. And here's the critical analytical point that seals his #1 position. It's not just that Jungkook improved, it's the rate of improvement relative to time invested. RM achieved higher overall English proficiency, yes, but RM had a 5 to 7 year head start and the benefit of intensive self-study from his early teens. Jungkook closed a massive gap in a fraction of that time. His English went from near zero functional ability to solo interview capable in roughly 3 to 4 years of what appears to be primarily passive absorption and real-world practice, rather than formal study. That rate of acquisition is extraordinary by any linguistic standard. And unlike RM, whose Japanese remained moderate, Jungkook demonstrated strong acquisition speed across both major foreign languages BTS engaged with. His Japanese was fast, his English was fast. Across the board, language after language, the Golden Maknae learned faster. There's a concept in linguistics called language aptitude, the innate cognitive capacity for acquiring new languages that varies from person to person. It encompasses phonetic coding ability, grammatical sensitivity, inductive learning capability, and associative memory. People with high language aptitude don't just learn faster, they learn differently. They absorb patterns unconsciously, they mimic sounds with less effort, they intuit grammar rules without needing them explicitly explained. And everything about Jungkook's language learning trajectory screams elite-level language aptitude. He didn't study the hardest, he didn't use the most sophisticated methods, he just absorbed, like he absorbs choreography after watching it once, like he absorbs vocal techniques after hearing them demonstrated, like he absorbs literally every skill he's ever attempted at a speed that makes the people around him question whether he's operating with the same hardware as the rest of humanity. The Golden Maknae title isn't just about singing and dancing, it's about an almost frightening capacity to learn anything, everything, at a speed that doesn't make sense. And foreign languages? They were just another item on the impossibly long list of things Jungkook decided to conquer without anyone even noticing until it was already done.
And there you have it, the complete ranking of BTS members' foreign language learning speed, from Jin's lovably relatable struggles at number 7 to Jungkook's almost supernatural absorption rate at number 1. But here's what makes this entire list so special. Not a single member on it failed.
Every single one of them, regardless of where they ranked, took on one of the hardest challenges a human being can face and did it while performing on the world's biggest stages, under the world's brightest spotlights, with the world's most dedicated fans watching every syllable. Jin turned his struggles into legendary comedy, Suga understood everything while choosing his moments in silence, J-Hope built bridges of warmth that needed no dictionary, V fell in love with a culture and let that love teach him its language, Jimin perfected every sound with the same discipline he brings to every dance move, RM carried an entire group's international voice on his shoulders for a decade, and Jungkook simply reminded us, one more time, why the word golden was never an exaggeration. 7 members, 7 different journeys, one undeniable truth. Language isn't just about words, it's about the courage to try, the humility to fail, and the love that makes you keep reaching across every barrier until your voice finally lands where it was always meant to go. And that's something all 7 of them mastered a long, long time ago.